Okay. Hello, everyone. We are live here with Amy, an amazing client of mine that I'm so excited to be interviewing today. Amy is a clinical psychologist in training, and she is a smart little cookie. And I'm excited to interview her and share with you our experience working together and share with you Amy's story and how she went from not being pregnant to being pregnant and how her journey kind of unfolded and some of the struggles that she went through to kind of get to where she is today. So today's little interview, we're just going to be having a nice relaxed conversation here, and I would love to just hear a little bit about you, Amy. Why don't you just share with us kind of who you are, what you do, and kind of the stage and phase of life that you're currently in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nora. So I think to start off, like you said, I'm a clinical psychologist in training. So I'm currently working towards my doctorate degree in clinical psychology. So I'm in year 5 of 5, so I'm almost done. But
Congratulations. That's
thank
exciting.
you. But if anybody knows, being in graduate school is very stressful. So while also being in graduate school, I got married and I moved to a new state. So I'm originally from Illinois, but met my husband in our undergraduate about 11 years ago out in Denver. So we lived there for a bunch and then moved back to Chicago for graduate school. So that was a big kind of stressor of coming back home, but having somebody with me who had never lived in Chicago or the Midwest, which is very different. Um, and then, yeah, started graduate school. And then this last year, I actually started working with Nora to try to kind of start on this journey after a lot of things happened in COVID, including my husband and I were supposed to officially get married, and then we canceled our wedding and then rescheduled and ended up having a lot of wedding stress due to COVID. So, needless to say. So yeah, and then I got my 5th year internship / residency in Indiana. So we actually just moved to a new location in Indiana about a month and a half ago. So still kind of getting settled here and figuring out a new state and where we are in life.
Yeah, a lot of transition, a lot of things to navigate over the last couple of years. So
Lot.
lots, absolutely lots. Yes, I know. I think anybody watching this or just so many of us can resonate with a lot of the struggle and challenges and also just kind of being in this limbo phase of unknown, uncertainty, what's going to happen. And
Yeah.
while you have all of that swirling around you and you're at this phase and stage of your life where you're trying to conceive and plan for pregnancy, to grow your family and prepare your body, it's like, oh my gosh, you've got all this stress on one end. And then on the other end, it's like, well, how do I kind of bring that from here to here so that I can just
Exactly.
live
And
in
trying
an
to figure out
environment?
timing. Yeah.
Yes, that's a big one. Absolutely.
You
Timing,
know,
especially with all the moving.
exactly. And I know you and I talked about this a lot in our individual sessions of, is this the right time? Should I wait? Should I keep going? My husband and I talked a lot about that. And, it ended up being for us personally that a good friend of ours said, who has some kids, was like, there's never a good time. I'm like, okay. He's like, you'll never have kids if you keep waiting. So for us, that really resonated. Obviously, we had to take still a lot of things into consideration. But
Mhm.
for us, that was like, okay, let's go forward. So
Yes, awesome. Well, on that note, then, what would you say then would be, as you thought about preparing for pregnancy and having this, demanding kind of school life behind you, and obviously you're very driven and you're motivated, and you're in a career that does require a lot of demands on you. And so, what were some of the fears, other than timing, that you kind of just talked about around preparing the body for pregnancy? And what were some of the things that you felt or that came up for you, kind of leading up to knowing that this was the plan for the next 12 months or for the next year? But like, what were some of those fears that kept you from maybe moving forward in a different way, or potentially even finding somebody to work with to kind of keep you focused, keep you accountable, and kind of to help you really kind of achieve that goal of getting to where you needed to be so that you could eventually, fall pregnant when the time was right for the both of you?
Yeah. So I think there was a lot of fears, and I think some of them came like professionally, but also personally. So, kind of more professionally, it was like, can I take time off school? Do I want to extend my school? What does this mean for graduation? And like you said, I'm very driven. So it was very like task oriented, like, what's this going to mean sort of deal. So I think a lot of anxiety came from that. And then personally, I had a few different friends who had either really struggled with fertility and becoming pregnant. One of my friends went through about 2 years of different sort of alternative modalities to try, and my other friend luckily fell pregnant right away, but had a really, really hard pregnancy and a really hard traumatic birth. So I heard both of their stories, and it kind of started to seep into me of like, I don't want either of those. I want I want
Yeah.
a really easy pregnancy and birth. And I know that's, I think everybody hopes that and wishes that. But I think those were some of my like personal fears of just hearing other people's stories and asking them like, what do you wish you would have done differently? And a lot of them said, I wish I would have cared for myself beforehand. I wish I would have known what I was getting into. I wish, and their list was never ending. And me being a very research oriented person, a very like, I need to know the facts, and everything was just like, I don't know anything. So I need
Mhm.
to get this knowledge. I need to figure out what I can do to help make this easier. And as you said earlier, Nora, just the stress of school in and of itself, I didn't want to then pile on stress of, I don't know anything about trying to become pregnant or what that entails or what's going to change in my body and things like that. I didn't need extra stress. Um,
Yes. I
so I
remember
think
you sharing this. I remember you sharing this on our first discovery call. Well, I remember you had told me this. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it still rings true. Looking back, I think um, I was probably more stressed about those things than I actually wanted to admit in the moment.
Mhm.
Um, but I talked with my husband, and he was like, "I don't know anything," and um, our family situation's unique in that we have support, but there's certain topics that we don't talk about, and pregnancy and sex being one of them. Um, and so I didn't even feel like I could ask my mom, or I could ask other kind of older women who had been through this journey and kind of what it was like for them. And so I just felt really kind of alone besides my friends who had gone through it. And I knew that I
Mhm.
wanted somebody who had an objective opinion to kind of help me guide through it. Um, because I've known through mentors in the past and being a student that it's always nice to be able to ask those questions versus just looking at research data. Um,
Exactly. And knowing how much is out there as well, right? And taking that time to kind of sift and sort through all the contradicting information that's out there and what to
yeah,
listen to, what to not listen to, and how much more stress that kind of would have brought into your space in your life when already the stress was amounting just from,
absolutely.
yes, yes.
Yes, and all the fear stories that are out there, I think there's a lot of personal stories, but some of them can really stick with you and kind of get in your head. And I think that's what was happening for me a lot as I was reading all of the terrible stories. And
Mhm.
we're not hearing as much of like the positive, uplifting stories. And so if that's all you're kind of exposed to, it just kind of puts this cloud over you of like, I had this fear that that was going to be me
Mhm.
100%. Um, so yeah, I
Mhm.
think a lot of those kind of fears mixed together um, made me start to go like, this is never going to happen.
Mhm. So what was that turning point for you? What was the catalyst for you that made you kind of say, okay, like you're noticing and you're aware that this kind of dark cloud is over your head, you're being bombarded with kind of these negative stories or, you just kind of feel alone in the dark. What was that turning point that made you kind of seek help and find somebody that was going to be able to support you kind of in this journey?
Yeah, so it's actually, I was in therapy one day, and I was talking with my therapist about a lot of these fears that were coming up, um, and just kind of talking to her about, like, like, her job is not like, that's not her job. Her job is like the emotional side. Like, I can guide you through these things, but I don't know anything about pregnancy myself. Um, so she had really encouraged, like, you get so much out of therapy. What would you
Mhm.
think about doing something similar with, like, even a close friend or a friend of a friend? Or she's like, there's tons of coaches out there, or there's tons of other support people. And um, that for me was a really big kind of like, oh, duh. Like, I'm already asking for help with emotional side of, like, the mental health side of my life. And obviously that's the field I am, so I'm very much involved in that. But um, it hadn't even, like, crossed my mind that there were options out there like this
Mhm.
for preconception. I just kind of thought, like, okay, you just get, like, your OBGYN and then they tell you everything. Well, mine told me nothing.
I,
She told me,
I,
you're fine, go forth.
yes, yes.
Um,
I think a lot of women in this community can relate to that. A lot.
yeah, I mean, she didn't
Yes.
even run blood work. She didn't run anything. And I told her in our initial appointment that I was really afraid that I wasn't going to be able to conceive. And her response was, there's no data to support that.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
but it was still a fear of mine.
Hmm.
Um, and so I just kind of felt, again, I think that kind of contributed to me feeling really alone in the matter. But it really was when my therapist kind of urged me to, like, find a different support,
Hmm.
um, that could support with the true fears I was having. Like, is my body ready? Am I nutritionally ready? Am I mentally prepared for this? Um, what do I need to kind of shift in my life around those things? Um, and that's when I like went home after that and was like, okay, start Googling. um, and I think
Dr.
that
Google could be your friend or your enemy, right?
exactly, and I hadn't had any friends kind of go through, like, a preconception coach or work with anybody, but um, I think that if they would have had the opportunity, looking back, I think everyone would have agreed that it would have been helpful for them.
Mhm.
And I know it was for me, so I'm glad
Mhm.
I got that push.
Yes, I love working with you, Amy. It's been such a pleasure. But so on that note, then, what would you say during our time together? Because we spent over 3 months really taking the time to delve into your lifestyle, really get into the nitty gritty with your nutrition, into the supplements, even enlisting your partner to get him on board in a lot of things, because that's a big challenge for a lot of my clients and a lot of women in this space. So I'd love for you to share with kind of the listeners today is what would you say the three your top three kind of health transformations were, um, moving through our time together and moving through the program in a way that really gave you lasting results that you're still implementing to this day, as opposed to just this quick fix? Because we know that any health transformation or any major change that you're going to make in your life definitely requires consistency and time to kind of build into your life. So I'm curious to know what were kind of three big health challenges or changes that you really noticed from the program.
So I will say, I mean, there's so many, but the first one that really comes to mind is knowing what to eat. So I always considered myself like, oh, I eat relatively healthy. And there was a few spans of weeks when I was over the holidays, like, I think right before we started working together, that it was like I was eating out every single day because I was overwhelmed and I was tired. And um, but I always thought, like, oh, like, I have, yogurt in the morning, and, I eat vegetables and things. And um, through talking and working with you, I really found out that my meals weren't balanced. And so I wasn't getting the appropriate amount of proteins and fats and carbs. It was really carb heavy and really like some protein, but like really lacking on fat or vice versa. And I remember having conversations with you about like, I'm just always hungry. I don't know what's happening. Like I'm eating enough food and I'm eating enough calories and I'm not like going like super crazy over here, but I'm just always craving more. And once we really started to kind of work with what was going on my plate and the right portions of like fat to protein to carbs and kind of balancing that out, I noticed a huge shift. Like I used to be a person that would eat up until my bedtime. Like 10 minutes before bed, I was having a snack. And I really noticed that by like every morning I wake up and I have breakfast and I'm like, oh, no, Nora said, put this, and I'm still telling myself what Nora told me. And
in a
so,
good way. I know that's all not a negative way, in a good way.
No, not at all. It's always good. It's always like, oh yeah, remember this. Like you're gonna feel better if you add this, and even with I'm really big into smoothies right now, and especially during the first trimester. And I was like, okay, make sure to add enough fat, make sure protein gets in there, it's not just fruit. So little things like that, I think, to really help kind of have that balance was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is my caffeine consumption. Oh my gosh, I don't miss it at all. I have about 1 cup of coffee a day. But for those who don't know, I was drinking probably 8+ cups of coffee every day throughout the day, minimal water. And it was just to kind of keep up with grad school and keep up with all of these things. And Nora, I remember you telling me like, you better cut that out now because if like because once you become pregnant you can't do that and it's going to be a lot harder to kind of wean yourself off. So nowadays it's like I'm happy, like I love the taste of coffee, so I'm even happy with like decaf or something like that. But that was a big shift and I remember that being really hard for me, and kind of when you first told me that I remember being like, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And now here I am having 1 cup of day and I'm like, oh, and I don't even finish
I don't miss it. And you don't even miss it.
Exactly. I think the third thing, and it's hard to tell because it's gone now, but when I first started working with you, I had really bad acne throughout my entire lower jaw and chin line. And from working with you, we really kind of deciphered that it was something going on was really imbalanced. It wasn't kind of in the places where you'd think it's food related. It was very hormonal or something happening. And I just noticed from January, and I took pictures of it just to show the progress. And I looked back at them last night preparing for this, and I was blown away that that's what my face looked like. Because through working with you and finding that balance and finding the right supplementation and things like that, my skin's cleared up. I might have like 1 or 2 just from wearing a mask all day at work. But really my skin cleared up. I feel better. And I really don't have the breakouts that I used to have that were really inflammatory. So many changes. I feel like I could keep going, but
no, that's great. Those are great. Those are great. And yes, for sure, the acne around the jawline and the incessant need for coffee all day, like you could just look at that as screaming like hormone imbalance, hormone imbalance, hormone imbalance. And we know that preparing for pregnancy requires really balanced, robust hormones that are just ready to go. So I think by taking that time in advance for you really helped get us to, where you are today, which we didn't talk about at the beginning. But Amy, how far along are you now?
Yeah, so I'm right about like 14 and a half weeks. So I just kind of hit the second trimester, feeling really good about that. Everything's on track, looking good. So
and how has your experience been through the first trimester? Like, were you one of those people who you're so lucky? Maybe it's all the prep work you did.
I really think it is. So I think, there's going to be a genetic component because I will say I've done a lot of research, but
Yes, absolutely.
shocking.
Yeah.
But I will say I have a couple of other friends who are currently pregnant as well, and have really had miserable first trimesters, from nausea to all sorts of other symptoms. And um, I do believe that, yes, while I am a part of the lucky group, I do think that a lot of it had to do with how much I had the nutrient stores set up for myself through the supplementation and the proper eating, how much I had prepared my body through exercise and just the food intakes in and of itself, and mentally prepared myself of,
Yes.
you're not going to be able to have alcohol. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. And I think some people, that can make it extra hard if you're used to socializing or things like that. So I think the mental preparedness and the physical preparedness that I went through, I still had symptoms, don't get me wrong. I still had constipation and I had bloating and there were moments of nausea, but comparatively, it was very small little blurps, and I knew how to care for myself in those moments.
Yes.
And so I think that was a big thing of, I was already taking supplementation that, if once I started looking into it, like we had started it beforehand, and then I'm like, oh, that helps with nausea. I didn't know that, and like little things like that. And so I think I am lucky, but I also think that doing the work beforehand set me up for a lot of success with that too. Because I have friends who didn't prepare, and one of them in particular had a really rough day. And I do wonder, obviously I'll never know for sure, but I
Yes.
wonder if it could have
Yes.
been different for her,
Yes.
given if she would have prepared a little bit more.
And so as we kind of come to an end here, I do want to ask, what was, maybe did you have kind of like, what was one of the hardest things for you kind of as you went through this preparing for pregnancy journey before you actually ended up falling pregnant and saying, okay, this is sticking, this is happening, we're good to go? What was one of the most challenging things that you went through?
I think, it's always hard to like talk with people, like get my husband on board was hard, but
Hmm.
he really was supportive in that. I think for me personally, so for those who don't know, I actually became pregnant earlier this year and had a miscarriage. And I think that was really probably the hardest time, because I was so excited and I got my hopes really, really high. And then I will say, like, thank God I had Nora, because I was like texting you the whole morning of like, what is
Yes.
happening? Um,
Yes.
and
I remember
I
that.
really
Yes.
think it was one of the hardest days that I've had in my life, because it was very isolating. It was very alone. And then it made it hard for me to want to get back on track and for me to
Mhm.
want to stick with it. And then once I became pregnant again, it was terrifying of like, will this stick? Or it's almost like, what's going to happen? Um, and so we were always kind of on guard of what's going on, my husband and I, and really kind of checking in, no matter, and I found a different provider who was like, we can get you an early ultrasound, we can do these things. And I think that was really
Yes.
supportive as well, of finding a provider that understands and doesn't just brush it off saying, oh, that's normal, that happens to people.
Yes.
I had one provider and I was like, bye, not dealing
Yeah.
with you.
Good. No, I think that's so important I'm glad you're sharing that, because I think again, a lot of women in the communities, I always tell everybody, you really have to resonate with who you're working with, right? Finding a
Yes,
practitioner, a professional, a provider, your doctor, and make sure, if you need to, you get that second opinion. If you need to, go find
100%.
somebody else, and you don't have to feel bad about it. So
Nope.
I'm happy, Amy, that you're sharing your experience with that too, and to remind everybody that, just like you, they need to advocate for their health, right? You need to advocate for yourself. So,
Yes. And now I have a provider who even asks me, like, are you worried about anything now? Like, now that we've had the second trimester, do you feel a little bit better? And when we first started working together, she would ask, like, she would say, call me with anything, even if it's just anxiety. Like, I don't
mhm,
mind. Like, I know what happened. And she's using that approach of like, I know that you're probably more anxious because of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really do encourage everybody, if you are not clicking, even with a little thing with a provider, you need to find someone that you trust,
Mm-hmm.
and will have your back on those things because that's their job.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. So, Amy, is there anything, as somebody who has, gone through and had some ups and downs, before getting to where you are now, successfully in trimester 2, feeling good, looking amazing, by the way, and settled into your new home, ready to start your last year of grad school, just, crushing life, which is amazing. But what would you say is, what would your kind of be one takeaway to anybody listening or anybody on the journey who might be trying for many times already? Maybe they've had multiple miscarriages, maybe they haven't even started trying yet, but if you had one thing to share and kind of impart some wisdom, what would that be?
I'd say find your support system, whether it's through a coach like you, Nora, or your husband or your best friend, somebody who can provide that objective opinion and really be truthful with you on some of the, maybe the habits that you're going through or things like that that maybe are contributing to like some suboptimal results. For me, it was working with you, Nora, and kind of having somebody point out like, well, you're really not eating as well as you probably should, or you're not exercising as much. And so having that person that can be supportive and also kind of point out those things, I think was really beneficial for me, and kind of getting to where I am. So, and somebody to lean on and be like, this is really hard and this sucks and I don't want to do this today. And they're
Yes.
like, okay, that's okay. How do we get back to it tomorrow? So
Yes.
somebody without judgment, somebody that can kind of keep you accountable while having that emotional support and someone to lean on, because it is hard and it is exhausting and it gets
Just like it
old.
takes, yeah, just like it takes a village to raise a child, it also takes a village to create a child.
It does, yeah.
Yes.
And it can be frustrating. There's some days that are better than others. So finding someone that you can always go to that doesn't seem like that you don't feel like you're being a burden to, I think is really a big key piece that I would advise.
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate your time, coming on this morning, and again sharing your story and sharing your experience. So thank you so much, and best of luck to you as September rolls around. And I look forward to getting that email and picture when little
Yes.
baby arrives.
Yes, of
Yes.
course. Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much,
again.
Amy. Okay, bye.